with Vito, one of the key scenes of not just Vito's characterization, but the whole of the book is the Asterix Delicious Boy murder, and when he's killed by Polymarvelli, you see how he steps over him and is eating at the same time, and possibly incriminates him and the whole organization by stupidly eating over the corpse.
Well, and the funny thing is, Paulie has just shot this kid dead, and that's a scene that people are going to say that I took from Goodfellas, which is not true. I took it from the same source as Goodfellas, because this is an old mafia legend about people being hotheads. There are about 3 or 4 major mafia legends that are tried to be passed off in Goodfellas as original, that are clearly mafia legends that go back to the 20s and 30s. That shooting of the boy in Goodfellas is one of them. I reused that twice here, and in both times, you get the thing like you said. What's his face? Vito is eating and dumps the crumbs on the corpse, and Paulie, who's just recklessly shot one of his own people dead, starts yelling at Vito to have respect for the dead. And so, it's like what the fuck are you doing? This is a dead. This you have to have respect for the dead, and he's just shot him dead less than a minute ago, and Vito's coming in just dropping Ritz crackers or whatever on the corpse.
Yeah, there's an even greater scene involving cookies, but we'll talk about that at another time. I want to talk about like the characterization element because of the scope of the book. Sometimes the characterization is literally separated by hundreds of pages, and you'll have to connect them up. For instance, Paulie has some interesting interactions with Jake LaMotta and Frank Sinatra, and those interactions are separated by hundreds of pages, and you get the full scope of their relationship later on. That's an interesting technique in how it's kind of just dropped,
and it should
seemingly randomly, but with good purpose to it.
It should be said too, I started out in the Vincetti Brothers. I have a few scenes of real life people that make it in, mostly criminal types that make it into there, like Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman, and then there's a black gangster whose name slips my mind who's in the Vincetti Brothers, and a handful of others. In this one, I really just there's no hold bars. Everyone from Woody Allen to Howard Hughes to Frank Sinatra to Andy Warhol to Roger Corman. I mean, there's probably about 50 or 60 real life celebrities, most of them who are dead now, but that make an appearance. Dorothy Kilgallen, who was a famous journalist who was investigating the JFK assassination, who then mysteriously died herself. And I used that real life thing there. That's one of the things I do that I've done well in Vincetti Brothers, The Norwegian, and now in my spy book, and to a lesser extent in my Western book with some old Western heroes, is I use real life people and real life scenes and real life mysteries from those people's real lives, and I explain them in my book by having my fictional characters be somehow involved in those real life things.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that you set up the ambiguity of the celebrities and the assorted public figures. It's kind of like, if you take what happened to Africa thousands of years ago and you kind of fill in the logical gaps. So with Andy Warhol, the veneer of his whole act comes down when he interacts with Bit and a few others. And there's many examples of this.
Well, my favorite scene is I think in book 4 where Jim Morrison is singing at a Warhol party or something, and Bit Von Reindl and Andy Warhol end up fighting, and they end up falling off the stage. And I say it's like the first mosh pit incident, even though they didn't know what a mosh pit was back then, as this dwarf and Andy Warhol are beating each other up and being buoyed up by the crowd as Morrison sings.
There's also some interesting filmic techniques, since we were speaking about this, that you would think only work in the film, but you use very well in prose. There's one incident where Paulie just looks up at the ceiling, I believe, and it says right here, he couldn't tell if it was a fly or a horsefly, and let his tongue roll out as his eyes drifted with the speck. until they were no longer his eyes but the eyes of another man a few days later in the back of another bar and grill in the South Bronx, watching the first televised presidential debate between Vice President Richard Nixon and Senator John F. Kennedy. This set of eyes belonged to a tall, young, blond man named Ronald Oliphant, aka the Norwegian, a feared and legendarily proficient contract killer. So that right there, it cranes away from Polly,
Yeah.
and what this conversation was naturally transitions into a different character, and you kind of begin thinking about the duality of that, just in how much these two characters match just by that transition.
Yeah, and well, we can talk about the meaning of the overall title. I mean, it's called A Norwegian in the Family versus The Norwegian in the Family. I was thinking of the two of them, and that's why I got the idea of making Manny write the book called The Norwegian in the Family, because I thought it'd be interesting if the Norwegian was somehow grafted into the Maravelli family. But in the course of writing it, I went against that. But I used the phrase, I think, 2 or 3 times. Paulie says something like, it's be interesting to have the Norwegian or a Norwegian in the family. And so that's where the title comes from. But the title came first. I then worked that in as the reason for the title later.